What's up, YouTube? It's Stuart. I'm Gus from account, and Happy New Year. It's a new year. Of course, I think I have released a video near the new year, around Christmas with Luke. I hope you guys have been enjoying the Evil Twins installments. Of course, if you want to see all of them, then you can go join onwards. But of course, I will be uploading some of them, particularly the tier list ones, probably here on YouTube a couple weeks after we do them on onwards. Okay, so today is a video that I haven't done in a while that I wanted to redo for this edition. It is not an S to A tier, S to D kind of power ranking tier list. That's not what we're doing today. We're starting the year off nice and light. Yeah, so we're going to be doing a negative play experience tier list. So I have done this before. And so the idea is we're going to be ranking armies by how horrible they are to play against. Now, another component of this that I want us to kind of take into account is also how horrible they are to play with. Because often there is a little bit of a link if you're honest with yourself. Like, if you find the army is a little bit horrible to play, then it's probably also horrible to play against. That isn't always the case, as we'll get into, but that is a general trend. Now, what makes an army have qualities that make it a negative play experience? Well, things with little to no counterplay is obviously the first thing. Things that happen from range. What else? I mean, the general sort of play style of stopping whatever your opponent wants to do is negative. Recursion that is overbearing is negative, so something like Flesh Eater Quartz that can just bring whole units back, or, there's other armies that do similar things. This is negative. Armies that have, too much front-loaded damage, this can be negative to play against, because you can just get all your toys removed at the start of the game. These sorts of things, right? Things that are positive. You feel like your opponent's army has a clear path to victory, and if you stuff up and give them that victory, then that's on you, and you don't feel bad for losing because you know that you made the mistake. Or armies that play, generally pretty strategically, they play pretty honest, but your opponent needs to play well. That also feels pretty good to play against, right? Other things that are negative, armies that are really reliant on the double turn, for example, and there's a lot of those here. Armies that have, a singular mechanic that is a little bit overbearing is another thing. So we'll talk about each of the armies in specific. I'm just trying to give some rough categories here to kind of paint a picture of what makes an army a positive or negative play experience, okay? Now, of course, this is a subjective thing. As I will always say on tier lists, this is my opinion. However, I think given how many games I've played at 4th, I could probably speak on this pretty well. To date, I have played with every army except 2 in 4th edition. So I can also speak to the side of the play experience on the player's side. So the 2 armies that I have not played are KO and Kruleboyz. Okay, every other army I've played multiple games with, and some obviously many games, as we'll get to. Okay, so we'll start off nice and good with Idoneth Deepkin. Of course, I'll get it out of the way. The slightly negative thing about this army is obviously the turn 3 strike first. But the army feels balanced in such a way now where it's not completely over when they get the turn 3, strikes first on. Because, well, the army has genuinely a little bit of a damage problem. It does, okay damage, but it's not anywhere near as explosive as the other armies in the game. And so it doesn't feel like if the Idoneth Deepkin player gets a double 2 to 3, that it's necessarily always over. Of course, if you're playing a fragile army, it can be over, but that's probably more of a flaw in your army than necessarily reflective of the actual punching power of Deepkin. So before, I would say at some points in Age of Sigmar, this has been a really negative play experience army, particularly when the eel spam was a thing. Of course, eel spam is a thing again, but it doesn't feel negative to play against, okay? So I would put this not in the beard buying territory. I didn't explain the categories, but I mean, you think you can kind of work it out. But basically, up the top is, this is terrible play experience. Up the bottom is, we're probably going to become mates over this game. I think with Deepkin, I think we both feel pretty good about the game. I enjoy playing against them for the most part. Okay, Seraphon. Again, a relatively honest army, this one. I would just say there's a few things that, again, probably stop it from being in the beard-buying territory. So the first thing is it's overly reliant often on the 4-up bring a unit back thing. And those sorts of swingy mechanics can hurt you a little bit. It can hurt your soul a little bit when you've killed 6 Kroxigor, and then the Seraphon player gets the 4-up the first time, and then doubles you back with 3 Kroxigor, and then also gets the 4-up on the second turn of the double to get something else back. Like, I know then you're basically rolling 3 4-ups effectively, so relatively low chance, but it can happen. From the Seraphon player's side, the fact that you have to rely on a 4-up is also frustrating. Now, if you put Kroak in your list, I would say that, on one hand, putting Kroak in makes it a little bit more of a negative play experience, because obviously there's a hero phase that does a bunch of mortal wounds, and it becomes a sort of castle army. But at the same time, you're not having that 4-up in there as well. So until we see, possibly someday we might see a Slann and Kroak together. Before that happens, I think right now I'd be happy putting this in here. Okay. All right, Fireslayers. Okay, so this is an interesting army. Because one of the main things that this army has is kind of always been a problem, and I think actually now is worse than it has ever been, which is that all the units look the same. Okay, and to play against that means that if you don't have intimate knowledge with Fireslayers, you just kind of won't be able to judge what anything does. Like, is this a hitty unit? Is this a tanky unit? Is this a support hero? Is this a fighty hero? For the most part, the eye test doesn't really work with Fireslayers, right? Like, you look at, for example, Vulcan Flameseekers, and you're like, they look like they have about the same amount of armor as all the other Fireslayers, except they don't. They have a 5-up save, and so, of course, inevitably, you enter game, and someone hits your Flameseekers, and you go like, oh, I'm in Forge Brethren, I got light defense, so that's +2 save, so I get a 4-up save against your Rend 1, and your opponent just looks at you extremely puzzled. And that is one example of Fireslayers just being genuinely confusing to play against. There's also these runes that have specific timings where you have to use them, and, if your opponent has intimate knowledge of when you have to use them, then the game becomes quite interesting. But if they don't, it's mega gotchas all the time. Fireslayers is also incredibly easy army to cheat timings with. Like, we've all probably seen a Fireslayer player who forgets to do the strikes first until the start of the combat phase and goes like, can I do it now? Don't do that if you're a Fireslayers player. I've done that, I think, once when I was first playing the army. I didn't do quite the combat phase, but at the end of the hero phase I did it, and I've just sworn to never do that ever again. As it's, it's part of the skill of playing the army. Yeah, so I would put this in sort of this category here in the middle, where not negative, not super negative, but definitely not positive either. I think most of us would feel pretty neutral about playing against Fireslayers. Okay, Kharadron Overlords. Of course, has to be said, probably up there with the most negative play experiences of all time. I think across the years, this army's had so many just horrible armies that should never exist. It's a 40k army with guns, with like transporting tanks. Like, it's just literally a 40k army. And now it's kind of a really anemic version of what it used to be, but the thing it's got is the ability to run away with a boat with redeploy, and nobody likes that. So the only reason that this army is not really negative play experience is because it kind of sucks, but if it didn't suck, it would be horrible to play against. So I'm going to put this in, of course, would rather not even play the game. Let me make that a bit clearer. But I would rather, if you want to bring KO, I would honestly, if I'm going to be completely honest, would rather just not even play the game. If I had the choice, like if we're doing this for fun, and I'm not interested in getting better at the game, and I just want to have fun on a Saturday, I would rather do literally anything else with my life than play a game versus KO. So that's why they're up there. Daughters of Khaine. So again, has to be said, they kind of suck. So we got to let that not color our perception too much. Morathi is really negative, always has been. It's negative for both players, I kind of feel like the Daughters of Khaine player. I feel like some of them sometimes would just rather like, can we just have a hero monster war scroll that's normal, and I don't have this weird situation where my army's just on a timer. I don't think anyone likes that. That should just not be in the game, I think. I think everyone would be happy with Morathi just being like, you know, like a 20 wound god monster. You know, and you get the wizard and then the fighting monster, and you can rally and do all that stuff. But if your opponent actually puts something big into her, she does actually die. That would be fun. It's what every other unit in the game is. Can we please do that? Please. Please. All I want for Christmas is... well, Christmas is long gone. But this year's Christmas, I would like... Yes, a normal Morathi. Other than that, obviously we have the Spectre of Bow Snakes. Because of some systemic nerfs to the game, like no redeploy countershoot, you can all-out defense against countershoot. By the way, how crazy is it that they've walked that back? And I don't know. Shooting is a bit of a mess in AOS 4, which I might do a video on at some point. But other things that are negative, Mind Razor, as we said, you know, swingy rolls that make a massive difference. And in this case, it's literally like 250% damage increase, right? Or, you know, double and a half is what I mean. If you get Mind Razor off, or if you don't for some units, which is insane, obviously. Can be a priority dependent army. Has this, I think it's a prayer where you do mortal wounds when you die. I find that an incredibly sexy ability, but if we're honest, it's not very good for the game. Not because it's overly strong or anything, but you could see a situation or a meta, or, you know, if the prayers become easy to cast, that would be a problem to play against. But in any case, I'd probably put it in the same tier as Fireslayers. Like, it's definitely not positive, but I don't think it's as negative as some of the other armies we'll get into. And of course, we couldn't talk about negative play experience without bringing up Lumineth, which it's actually impressive to me how almost every unit in this army is a negative play experience in its own unique way. And again, the only reason why it's not like completely horrible to play against at the moment is because it's been toned down a lot. But of course, we have the Foxes. That still exists. They've now made it frustrating for both players instead of one, which is great, I guess. Stone Guard are actually a frustrating design, and that feels like the most honest unit in the army. So I would not put them in the same tier as KO, but they're definitely pretty negative. Yeah. Stormcast. So Stormcast is the other side of things, where I don't think the army is negative to play against at all. Not even slightly. But the army is overpowered. And so that makes it feel horrible to play against. Now, there's certain units in the army that are worse to play against than others, like Karazai, or Krondus, or any of the big dragons, or, you know, Vanguard Paladors, or even Quest to Soulsworn because you teleport, or even because there's a Stormstrike, the toilet or whatever. You know, who am I kidding? I'd have to lop off like 15 units and nerf them all for this army to be a positive play experience. So, I think we can put it in the same tier as Lumineth, if I'm honest. Okay, Cities of Sigmar. Okay, depends what it is what I would say. If it's a bunch of shooting stuff, I would rather not even play the game, honestly. And that only doesn't feel super horrible to play against, because, again, it's not that strong. The melee stuff that's been going around recently, you know, hammers and executioners, that's fine. So, I'd put them in probably the Idoneth, Seraphon sort of tier of things. I think it's a fine army. Probably, yeah. Sylvaneth. Okay, so historically horrible to play against. Still have some quirks now that are not so great. So, two things now that I hate about Sylvaneth are the Belthanos Monstrous Rampage, where he gets to pick up on like a 3-up himself and put him in a really annoying position. Can be really annoying if he's going in and tagged you, because he can potentially bring some units out of combat. and Alariel's 4-up to bring something back. Are both incredibly negative abilities for the game. Other than that, I don't feel like Strike and Fade is anywhere near as negative as it was. Yes, you can do it on both players' turns, but you can't, just go in and hit and then run away, which is what you could do before, and it was very silly. But it's still, if you're a slow army, it still feels pretty awful to play against. And the trees are still some of the worst designed things ever. If you were to sit down from first principles and construct the rules that the game has around trees at the moment and tell people to use this army and have fun playing against it, you would be called mad, I think. I think it's like the worst implementation of the idea of putting trees down. Yeah, I think it's terrible. I honestly think if they just kind of reworked the faction terrain rules a bit, to make it less disadvantageous to bring faction terrain, and then just told Sylvaneth players, just put down one piece of a wood, okay? That's what you can do when you summon a wood. That would just be so much better for the game, because there's just so many weird situations when you play against Sylvaneth. Sylvaneth player feels like they're giving away tactics and, movement because of the trees, but they also need to put them down because they have to use them. So what they end up doing is often putting them off the side in weird places, but if you have teleports, then that could be a disadvantage as well. Other cases, they can put them in the middle of the board, and the terrain around them can be constructed. You can't move your big monster through the middle of the board at all. That definitely can happen. So all these things together, along with the general playstyle of they run at you and hit you and then run away, would make me put this army pretty negative play experience. Is it as bad as KO? Yes, and I think it's worse than Stormcast and Lumineth, I think. So I would probably put it up here. Yeah. Now, if you're a lovely person, of course I have friends who play this army. Shout out Terry. I'm happy to play the game, but otherwise, I would rather not. to be completely honest. Speaking of which, all right, here's my personal hot take. All right. So here's my reveal. Okay, there's one other army that's more negative play experience than this army, and that's all. Nurgle is horrible to play against. Okay, just terrible. It just, you don't think it is because it kind of sucks. All right, but I promise you, if they buff this army and it becomes good, it will be the worst thing to play against. All right. If you have to sit down and play against 90 Plague Bearers who all they do is just stand there, and then your opponent rolls swingy disease dice at the end of the turn, I tell you what, it's not a fun game of Warhammer, okay? This army is terribly designed and needs a redesign from the ground up because, so first of all, from the Maggotkin of Nurgle player's perspective, every unit feels kind of the same. And when you're a miniatures company trying to sell different models and trying to encourage players essentially to, buy lots of different models for their collection. They go to the store, they see something cool, they buy it. You want the units to actually feel different. And in Maggotkin of Nurgle, in a lot of cases, your damage is coming from disease. That's a lot of your damage. Unless you're playing Blight Kings and you've constructed, you're taking the Lord of Plagues and Lord of Blights. You'll get your sources of damage in Maggotkin of Nurgle are basically diseases and your monsters when they hit things. That's basically your source of damage, all right? Now, you can kind of buff up Plague Bearers to do a little bit of damage. We're still talking about basically nothing. It's a slow-moving army with 5-up wards, which is a swingy mechanic. It has incredibly swingy occasions, such as my tree needs to roll a 4-up. If I roll a 4-up, I'm going to get disease on 5 units. If I don't roll a 4-up, I'm going to get disease on no units, right? Because you can do, I'll pick that unit, and then I'm going to spread from that person to everyone within their combat range, okay? That's the classic trap with Nurgle. Particularly if you got Horticulus or something, slam down a tree, pick an enemy unit within 6, on a 4-up, they get diseases, everyone near them gets diseases, okay? Incredibly swingy and negative, okay? Now, Nurgle is probably one of the strongest late-game armies in the game. If you don't kill them early, they still have the potential to get to the late game and just win, okay? But the problem is that it's incredibly weak to getting just run at, and that is how you play against Nurgle. And you feel like, as a player, you don't have much strategy other than let's just run at Nurgle. Because if you just let Nurgle camp around and do nothing, they'll probably win the game. So that's also negative from the perspective of playing against them. Nurgle player doesn't really feel like they have much strategy. Playing against them, you don't feel like you have much strategy. You just whack the armies next to each other and you see what happens. Now, if you like killing lots of models, it might be fun. But that's the only way in which this army is fun to play against. Most armies, what's going to happen is you're going to go in and kill a bunch of stuff, and then Nurgle's not going to be able to come back. That's honestly what happens at the moment. But if they ever get stronger in the game, this could be a problem. So I would say that they are incredibly negative to play against. Yeah. Skaven. Okay, this is definitely up there. So I'm a Skaven enjoyer, as you guys know, but it's not great to play against, is it? I mean, 3 claw steps is a bit of a negative ability, right? Being able to move stuff in your opponent's player's turn. And there's just a lot of swingy rolls in this army that, okay, it's cool because it's Skaven doing science experiments, but I feel like if you roll a 6 and now you guys get an extra Ren for that turn, that just feels a bit silly. Honestly. Other things that are negative about the army, Plague Monks piling in at the end of the turn, still horrible. But I wouldn't say it's on the same levels as some of the other ones we just looked at. It's still an army that has some very clear weaknesses, and one thing I like about this army is it's got, it's got a weakness that usually, aside from Storm Fiends, okay, which are a problematic unit, basically everything could only do one thing. And that is actually quite good from a game design perspective. There's other armies here where, like Stormcast, for example, right, where every unit can pretty much do everything. And so, gets kind of boring from a list building perspective because of that. But also, it when you're playing against Stormcast, it doesn't really feel like, if I go here and hit this unit, there's like a specific weakness. Whereas Skaven is like, okay, if I fight the clan rats in combat, they're probably not going to do any damage. If I get to the rattling guns in combat, they will probably die. If my opponent has like a good hammer, 20 Storm Vermin with Vizix standing there, I know that is the hammer. If I play around that hammer, I might be able to, survive long enough to win the game. So I would put them in like kind of the Fireslayers thing where, okay, they've got some slightly negative things, but yeah, maybe you could put them here. This is I probably will put them in the please don't bring this army tier, because I wouldn't say I'm looking forward to playing against Skaven for the most part, but it's definitely not as negative as the ones we just looked at. Okay, Beast of Chaos. I wouldn't say this army is negative at all. And in fact, playing against it, I don't think it even feels negative when you're losing, which often you are at the moment, because this army is obviously overpowered. It's just like doesn't have that many rules. I mean, basically at the moment it's just efficient units that come onto the board and charge you, which is a bit negative, right? Coming onto the board and then charging with an automatic 4 is a bit negative, sure. And of course, Bestigor overtuned. But other than that, I wouldn't say that this is a necessarily negative play experience. The spells and the spell lore and the manifestations are too strong, and a lot of those are negative for the game. But overall, I would say that this is a decently enjoyable army to play against. Okay, Slaanesh. So, okay, yes, Bliss Barbs exist, but I mean, that's not the whole army, alright? Like, we have to be honest here with Slaanesh. And in my opinion, this is a pretty good, honest army that I think most of us probably enjoy playing against. I would say that at the moment this is contender for probably an army that I enjoy playing against. It's a very strategic army, right? So if I feel like I'm playing against Slaanesh, it's never just going to be, we run into the middle and roll dice, and then whoever rolls the better dice wins. The Slaanesh player needs to play in a specific way to win the game, and I need to identify what that is and stop it from happening. Yes, 20 Bliss Barbs is annoying, but I don't think we can just uniformly say that shooting is bad from the game. I think that would be too destruction-brained. There is a role for shooting in the game, and I don't think that Slaanesh is a negative implementation by any means. I can't really say anything super negative about this army. Maybe the range of everything is a bit too much. It's got heaps of mobility, and some people find playing against heaps of mobility a bit negative, but that's kind of all the army has that's really strong in any way. Other than that, it's just got decent rules. It's in a pretty good spot at the moment. I would say most of us enjoy playing against Slaanesh. I absolutely enjoy this. Other Chaos God, which I hate playing against, to be completely honest, is Khorne. Khorne's one of those armies where, again, this probably could do with a little bit of a redesign. Of course, we're in an index edition, so some of these are going to be misses. Okay, some of them have been hits. I love how the way the Fireslayers index is written. I think it's, for the most part, pretty cool. The rune timing could be adjusted. And there's a few other indexes here as well, which I think are pretty fun, like Seraphon, Slaanesh, cities for the most part. Deepkin's alright. Most of them are written pretty well. Khorne is not, alright? It's just not. Like, if you went back to last edition and asked people, so, you know Murderlust, right? So what if I told you that I hear what you're saying. The whole army's paying for Murderlust at the moment. I hear what you're saying. So what we're going to do is we're going to make you pay even more for Murderlust and make it better. What do you think about that? And we would all say, please, for the love of God, no. Okay? But that is exactly what the army has become. All right? All the units are really expensive and for the most part are bad for their points. Okay? Like if you just compare them to other armies, the same units, they are bad. And this was the case previously, but it's actually even more the case now, that Khorne overall is a mega inefficient army, okay? It also lacks a load of synergies. There's no way to get wards on the mortals, there's no real way to improve the saves of the demons, so this just means that your army is just squishy, and there's kind of nothing you can do about it. Like, yes, Blood Warriors are tanky, but they have no wards, so if your opponent has mortal wounds, they die. The same is true of Blood Crushers, Skull Crushers. And in Blood Crushers, only have a 4-up save now, so they're not even tanky either. So, yeah, this army, it dies really fast, which is Khorne, should be fine, but it's not, because everything's too expensive, okay? And why is everything too expensive? Because Murderlust is broken. And so, playing against this army, it just feels horrible. And I also think that me being a Khorne player, I've only played a couple games with Khorne this edition because I just don't like what they did at all. It's basically kind of forced the army to be around one mechanic, and you have to do stuff like, you know, there's a command trait to become a priest, and you just don't take that. You take the one where you start with a blood tithe because Murderlust is broken. You see the problem here? It's like the ability is just so warping to the whole army that you just have to invest more than you want into it. Like, often you have to take a Slaughter Priest, which feels terrible because he's not particularly great and he's really expensive, but you need Murderlust, so you're probably going to take him, right? So, yeah, this is right up there. I don't want to play against Khorne. Alright, Slaves to Darkness. Okay, so Be'lakor is a negative play experience. We all agree on that, okay? Other than that, though, I wouldn't say that this is as bad as Stormcast. There are some weaknesses to Slaves to Darkness. Like, generally speaking, it's not an army that will just win an honest fistfight. It's not really that sort of army. Now, I have to kind of speak in two different ways here, because there's one version of Slaves to Darkness now, which is like a bunch of Marauders, and then maybe some Hammers, or maybe not, maybe just a bunch of Marauders. And then the other version is, you know, like 1-drop, Gaunt Summoner, full Clown Car, full Send. Now that is a negative play experience, but I wouldn't say that it's as bad as some of these other armies up here. It just looks bad because it's strong, okay? But as soon as it's toned down a little bit, that won't be a negative play experience. If you have an army that can survive a hit, or has some meaningful, you know, Thorn-like mechanics, you'll be fine. Alright? Yeah, the same is true for the Marauders one. Right now, I feel like 80 points is too cheap, probably. We'll have to see where they go, but I think that Marauders right now are a little bit undercosted, probably. You just have to like compare them to like Plague Monks or something, and you can kind of get an idea of why it is that they're a little bit undercosted. But overall, I would say that this army is not by any means as bad as some of the other ones we've looked here. Yeah. Okay, so no surprises here that this is the most negative play experience army in the whole game, and it's Tzeentch. I don't think anyone is surprised by that in the slightest. This army sucks. Please don't play it. If you do play it, just buy me like a chocolate bar or something. you know what I'm saying? Just hook me up. Yeah. So why is this army so negative? Destiny Dice is still negative. In the world of countercharges as well and countercasting, it's even more negative. And then there's other things like the reliance on the teleport spell and a free teleport. I don't know about that. Yeah. Horrors, still horrible to play against. Yeah, pretty bad. Flesh Eater Courts. Okay, so Flesh Eater Courts have some negative play experience mechanics. I think Usaran in general is a little bit NPE. The save stacking, the going last thing, his spells are a bit awful to play against sometimes. But for the most part, I don't feel like this army is horrible to play against, as long as you have an army that can kind of deal with it. It's probably a little bit overtuned now. Not from the perspective of it being, I wouldn't say it's an S tier army, but it's just if your army cannot deal with it, there's just no way you can win, right? If you just have not enough damage, you will just not win versus Feck. And so that's a bit negative. But overall, I'd say that it's mostly an honest army. And so I would probably put it down here, as opposed to, yeah, being towards the top. Okay, Soulblight Gravelords. Again, another kind of recursion-based death army. So, what is the negative with Soulblight Gravelords? Well, we just have to kind of use our scrying eye and imagine that the army wasn't complete utter ass like it is right now. Now, in teams it has a role, okay? So, people will play it in teams. But I think if I were going to come up with an army that I could see myself going 0-5 with, even though I'm a good player, it would be this army. Where, like, I feel like I could almost win every game, but actually just lose. That would be Soulblight Gravelords. Yeah, this army has a serious damage problem. Like, it's probably the lowest damage army in the game by quite a margin. And so right now, it feels not too bad to play against because it kind of sucks. But if it was really good and things did a bit more damage, and also survived a bit longer because it's actually not very tanky at all, it would be fairly bad to play against. But I would just put it in here in the middle for now. It's definitely got some room to be negative potentially in the future. Okay, Ossiarch Bonereapers. So what's negative about this army? This is the Giga Chad army. This is an army of just Giga Chads. Some like super elite skeleton warriors that are just too good in the early game, but kind of are a bit anemic in the late game. Right? Generally speaking, if OBR hasn't won by turn 3, it's either going to be a small loss or they're going to get completely lampooned on like a double to 4 or something. That can happen. Okay. But usually OBR, I mean, they're very, very strong at the moment, I think, still. There's some negative elements in there, like Catacross, 5-up turning off commands and stuff. But again, I would say probably most of the negative play experience with this army is just that it's, like, overtuned. It's not that the army is negative intrinsically. It's just very elite and a bit overtuned. So I'd probably put it in, again, in this kind of middle sort of territory here, but I wouldn't say it's as bad as the other armies that are in the top half. Okay, Nighthaunt. Do I even need to talk about Nighthaunt? Because I feel like we all, as a community, are united on hating this army. I have always hated playing against Nighthaunt, because dice are just too impactful in games versus Nighthaunt. You know, Okay, yes, the charge rolls are slightly less impactful than they used to be, but stuff like saves just matters a lot versus, I mean, if you have a swingy attack profile that's like damage 4, it's just negative for both players. Like, the Nighthaunt person doesn't really want to just be sitting there relying on 4-ups. And for the most part, Nighthaunt's always been an army that's reliant on a double turn as well, right? It's reliant on getting stuff done in the early game. So, I wouldn't put it in the very top because it's not, it doesn't have a whole lot of mechanics that actively deny what I want to do, but it's a bit dicey. Charge while in combat on the whole army is probably a bit silly. That's probably a bit of a negative play experience, but other than that, it's not as bad as some of these ones up here. Okay, Ogor Mawtribes. So before, we were in the beer tier. Okay, what are we in now? Quick analysis from the audience while I take a drink of my tea here. What do you think we're in now? So, Ogor Mawtribes now. The main build is like 7 monster trucks. I would rather not even play the game. This army is a negative play experience. And I want to talk about why, okay? So, the prayer actively encourages the Ogor Mawtribes player to not do anything in the early game. And so that means when you're playing against Ogor Mawtribes, they don't really do anything the whole early game. You don't really interact with them at all. They either overload one flank so hard that you can't really adventure over there in the early game, or just stay wholly outside your threat range. And so what that means is, you kind of bumble along, and it gets to the mid-game, and the Ogre player wants to go in now because they've got their prayer off. Alright? Now, when this happens, they kind of need things to go right. They kind of need to potentially get a double turn would be great. And also stuff like, just key rolls, key mortal wound rolls, key attack rolls, because everything hits on 4s. Can just make a big difference. Things like the shooting can be really negative because it's just so swingy. It's like chain traps at damage 3 with 1 shot. And if there's 7 monsters throwing them, or 6 I guess because you've got a Frost Lord, then yeah, it's pretty annoying to play against. And yeah, I said at the start, the reliance on the double turn is what makes this army pretty awful to play against. Sons of Behemat. Okay, so what makes the difference between Sons of Behemat and Ogor Mawtribes? Well, Sons of Behemat are not a runaway in the early game army. And so that means that when you play against them, you're probably going to get to fight them a little bit earlier in the game. And so it doesn't feel like what it is with Ogor Mawtribes, where you're not in combat with ogres, and then maybe the ogre player plays to hard full send into a double, okay? And when that happens, the ogre player is going to be relying on that double turn dice. Okay, but Sons of Behemat have that a little bit, but not to the same extent. I would just say it's a slightly more honest version of what the ogres are trying to do. So I would put it up here. Of course, Gargants, there's swing rolls of do I kill the Gargant versus do I don't, and that's a big deal. But other than that, it's all right. Okay, Ironjaws. This one is fair, okay? I think that this army is, for the most part, designed fairly well. Not anything that's super negative here. Some clear strengths in terms of damage and durability, but of course the weaknesses of, threat projection. They've decided to make the chaff terrible, which I think is interesting, but it shows that they don't want the army to have really viable chaff. So I would say that we're in the beard buying territory for this one. Gits, again, I would probably put them also in the beard buying territory. There's maybe some slightly negative things to do with Gobapalooza, which maybe arguably puts it up to here, but a lot of the current builds don't run heaps of Gobapalooza. And we'll just get through the other things here. Cruel Boys. I don't know what the new Cruel Boys will be like, but the old one was slightly negative. I think probably the Dirty Tricks, there's still some of them in there that are going to be... well, the teleport's only in your turn now. So I think now they might be B tier, because we've lost the +1 damage super negative like ultra launch thing, and you can't teleport in your opponent's turn anymore. So I actually think that makes the army pretty honest and fun to play against. Bone Splitters has the Fireslayers problem where everything looks the same, and so that puts it here. And also, it has like a roughly kind of like stand on circles sort of play style, to be honest. And a bunch of things that are strange. Yeah, I mean, probably Bone Splitters is, in the same sort of territory as Doc. Alright, but that just about rounds it out. So if you're a player who plays Tzeentch, Nurgle, KO, Sylvaneth, Khorne, or Ogres, you should feel bad. And if you're a Kruleboyz, Gits, Ironjaws, or Slaanesh player, you are a hero. And that is all I want to say for today. Bye.